Hi, and welcome back to Sampling with Kontakt. As I mentioned in the last video, you can think of Kontakt having 3 levels, at which you can do various things. Before we begin, make sure you've downloaded the Samples Workshop folder from the link in the description. The samples are recordings of a Neo-Bechstein, which is an electroacoustic piano from the late 20s. It was designed to be very quiet when played acoustically, and has pickups, which allow you to play it through amplifiers. Think of it like a giant electric guitar, but with keys. There are 3 folders. 2 of them contain microphone signals, this one and this one, which were used to pick up the acoustic sound of the instrument, and a preamp folder that contains the pickup signal run through a tube amplifier. There's only 1 octave, but that should be enough for us to work with. Notice the funny structure of the file names, some text, and a bunch of numbers separated by underscores. There's a method to the madness, which we'll get to in a little bit. Let's close the instrument level options to declutter the interface a little, and open up the mapping editor. You can drag and drop samples from Finder on Mac or Explorer on Windows. If you don't let go of the mouse button, you can drag up and down to tell Kontakt how to map the samples. At the top, it'll be mapped to the entire piano roll, and at the bottom, the sample will be mapped to a single key. Dragging left and right changes where on the piano roll the samples are mapped to. There are 2 common ways of sampling instruments. Either you can sample each note separately, or you can sample in intervals. People often sample perfect fifths, and then let Kontakt or another sampler pitch the sample up or down to fill in the gaps. While sampling each note gives you a more accurate representation of the instrument you're sampling, it also increases its file size significantly. And it's a lot more work in all stages of the process, including recording, editing, post-production, and mapping. The benefits of sampling in intervals are smaller file sizes and a less time-consuming workflow. The samples we're working with were recorded on a per-note basis. Let's grab the first sample with the number 60 at the end of the file name from the pre-drive folder and map it to the entire keyboard range. You will need to set the root key to tell Kontakt where the note would originally sound. In this case, it'll be C4. So double click here and enter C4. Have a play around and listen to how it sounds. Fairly boring, right? Kind of monotonous and not very exciting. This is why it's a good idea to sample more than 1 note. Notice as well how in the lower registers there's a timing difference in how quickly the note plays when you press a key. Compare this to this. This is a side effect of the pitching that Kontakt does. The hammer mechanism in a piano adds a slight time delay between pressing a key and sound being heard, which can be up to 10 milliseconds. Because pitching stretches the audio in the lower registers, this delay gets bigger. Likewise, in the higher registers, it'll get smaller because the audio is compressed. In this little time interval, we can usually hear the mechanism which adds to the transient of the sound. But because we're working with a pickup signal, we can't hear it here. Now you could say, can't you edit the audio file to get rid of this delay? And you'd be correct. But since we're going to add the microphone signals, which do include the sound of the mechanism, we can't shorten the preamp signal at the front, because we would introduce a time difference between the signals, which can lead to phasing. You can change the velocity range of the sample by dragging from the bottom up or from the top down. You can also enter it in these 2 boxes. The left one is the minimum and the right one the max. Let's add a different pitch, also spread over the entire range of the keyboard, but with a different velocity. First of all, let's restrict our original note to only play from velocities 1 through to 63. Then we'll add another sample, map it across the entire key range, and either drag up or you can enter it in here as well. Set the root key to C4 as well. If we press the key softer, the lower pitch plays. Press it harder, and the higher pitched sample is triggered. Usually, we would sample multiple velocity layers of an instrument. This is not just done for a greater dynamic range, but also because as you play an instrument harder, the sound usually changes, adding more overtones and getting brighter. When we work with multiple velocity layers, sometimes there'll be an audible difference between individual samples mapped to the same key, but at different velocities, which can be a problem if you want to avoid obvious changes in timbre. There's a feature in Kontakt called velocity crossfades, which can solve this issue. It allows you to define a range in which both samples, the lower and the higher velocity level, are mixed together. It can be very useful, but you do need to be careful with it because it can create comb filters and make the transition range sound weird if the two samples aren't phase aligned. Let's first make our two samples overlap. Select both samples and right-click, then choose Batch Tools and Auto-Apply Crossfades. Let's delete these samples now. You can expand the mapping editor, which makes working with a lot of samples a little more comfortable. Just be aware that dragging and dropping doesn't work when the editor is expanded, at least on the OS that I'm on. You can also open up a list view, which makes selecting single samples or entire groups easier if you have a lot of samples to work with. One very useful feature when working with lots of samples is auto mapping. You can define key range, velocity range, root key, and set a sample to be mapped to a single key, all in the file name. That's the reason why the samples we're working with have such a weird looking name. The underscores separate different infos. The first part of the name is the group name, followed by the minimum and maximum velocity. The last number is simply the MIDI note, expressed as a number. You can find lists online that tell you which note is which MIDI number. Select all the samples and drag them into Kontakt. You don't need to worry where they go. Just drag them in anywhere. Once you have all the samples in the editor, make sure they're all selected and right-click to open up the auto map setup. Set the first parameter to make group name, the second to minimum velocity, the third to maximum velocity, and the fourth to single key. Press apply, and you can see that it's actually only mapped one of the samples. This is a common bug in Kontakt and has been there as long as I've been using it. You can reselect all the samples and click the auto key up here. And now all of them are mapped to where they should be. Now follow the same procedure for the dry R and dry L folders. Just drag the samples in, select them, and click the auto button. Let's now change the velocity range so it goes from 1 to 127, which you can do with this button. The button above it would have the same effect for the key position. This button over here allows you to lock samples in place to prevent you from accidentally moving or changing sample positions or velocity ranges. With this one, you can solo a single sample. Selected groups only will show you the samples of the group that's currently selected in the group editor. And auto select group automatically selects the group the sample is a part of. Make sure you save the instrument we've been working on, because we'll continue with it in the next video. Thanks for watching, and look after yourselves. Bye for now.